The Golden Bird. In the olden time, there was a king who had been behind his palace a beautiful pleasure garden, in which there was a tree that bore golden apples. When the apples were getting ripe, they were counted, but on the very next morning one was missing. This was told to the king, and he ordered that a watch should be kept every night beneath the tree. The king had 3 sons, the eldest of whom he sent as soon as night came out into the garden. But when night came, he could not keep himself from sleeping, and the next morning again the apple was gone. The following night the second son had to keep watch, and it fared no better with him. As soon as 12 o'clock had struck, he fell asleep, and in the morning the apple was gone. Now it came to the turn of the third son to watch. He was quite ready, but the king had not much trust in him, and thought he would be of less use than him and his brothers, but at last let him go. The youth lay down beneath the tree, but kept awake and did not let sleep master him. When it struck 12, something rustled in the air, and in the moonlight he saw a bird coming, whose feathers were all shining with gold. The bird alighted on the tree, and just plucked off an apple. When the youth shot an arrow at him, the bird flew off, but the apple had struck his plumage. The arrow had struck his plumage, and on one of his golden feathers fell down. The youth picked it up, and the next morning took it to the king, and told him what he had seen in the night. The king called his council together, and everyone declared that a feather like this was worth more than the whole kingdom. If the feather is so precious, declared the king, one alone will not do for me. I must and will have the whole bird. The eldest son set out. But why would the feather be worth more? The eldest son set out. He trusted in his cleverness, and thought that he would easily find the golden bird. When he had gone some distance, he saw a fox sitting at the edge of the wood, so he cocked his gun and took aim at him. The fox cried, "Do not shoot me, and in return I will give you some good counsel. You are on the way to the golden bird, and this evening you will come to a village in which stand 2 inns opposite one another. One of them is lighted up brightly, and all goes merrily within, but do not go into it. Go rather into the other, even though it seems a bad one." "How can such a silly beast give wise advice?" thought the king's son, and he pulled the trigger, but he missed the fox, who stretched out his tail and ran quickly into the wood. So he pursued his way, and evening came to the village where the 2 inns were, and one singing and dancing, and the other had a poor, miserable look. "I should be a fool indeed," he thought, "if I were to go into the shabby tavern and pass by the good one." So he went into the cheerful one, lived there in riot and revel, and forgot the bird and his father and all good counsels. When some time had passed, and the eldest son, for month after month, did not come home, the second set out, wishing to find the golden bird. The fox met him as he had the eldest, and gave him good advice, of which he took no heed. He came to the 2 inns, and his brother was standing at the window of the one from which came the music, and called out to him. He could not resist, and went inside, and lived only for pleasure. Again some time passed, and then the king's youngest son wanted to set off and try his luck, but his father would not allow it. "It is of no use," said he. "He will find the golden bird still less than his brothers, and if a mishap were to befall him, he knows not how to help himself. He is a little wanting at best." But at last he had no peace. He had let him go. Again the fox, sitting outside the wood, begged for his life and offered good advice. The youth was good-natured and said, "Be easy, little fox. I will do you no harm." "You shall not repent it," answered the fox. "That you may go on more quickly, get up behind my tail." And scarcely had he lifted himself when the fox began to run, and away he went over the stock and stone till his hair was... How big is this fox? Is this like Princess Mononoke, Wolf? When they came to the village, the youth got off. He followed the good advice, and without looking round, turned into a little inn, where he spent the night quietly. The next morning, as soon as he got out in the open country, there sat the fox already, and said, "I will tell you further what you have to do. Go on quite straight, and at last you will come to a castle, in front of which a whole regiment of soldiers is lying. But do not trouble yourself about them, for they will be asleep and snoring. Go through the midst of them straight in the castle, and go through all the rooms, till at last you come to a chamber where a golden bird is hanging in a wooden cage. Close by, there stands an empty golden cage for show. But beware of taking the bird out of the common cage and putting it into the fine one, or it may go badly with you." With these words the fox again stretched out his tail, and the king's son seated himself upon it. And away he went over stock and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. And when he came to the castle, he found everything as the fox had said. The king's son went into the chamber where the golden bird was shut up in a wooden cage. Okay, there's actually a picture of the prince riding the wolf here. Riding the fox, and it's a normal-sized fox. And He's like squatting over it. Like, it's like he's riding a skateboard. He's riding a fox like a skate. It's like Tony Hawk, but hundreds of years ago. He's also holding a sword by a... Maybe that's the best way to... I don't know. It seems kind of odd. Yeah, he's literally riding a small fox like a skateboard. Note to... PSA for everyone. Don't stand on a fox. Their spines will shatter and their organs will burst out of them. You know, they're not strong enough to carry a human being. They are not skateboards. In a wooden cage, whilst a gold one stood hard by, and 3 golden apples lay about the room. But, thought he, it would be absurd if I were to leave the beautiful bird in a common and ugly cage. So he opened the door and laid hold of it, put it into the golden cage. At the same moment the bird uttered a shrill cry. The soldiers awoke, rushed in, and took off to prison. The next morning he was taken before a court of justice, and as he confessed everything, was sentenced to death. The king, however, said that he would grant him life on one condition, namely if he brought him the golden horse, which ran faster than the wind, and in that case he should receive over and above as a reward the golden bird. The king's son set off, but he sighed and was sorrowful for how he was to find the golden horse. But at once he saw his old friend the fox sitting on the road. "Look you," said the fox, "this has happened because you did not give heed to me. However, be of good courage. I will give you my help, and tell you how to get to the golden horse. You must go straight on, and you will come to a castle, where in the stable stands the horse. The grooms will be laying in front of the stable, but they will be asleep and snoring. You can also quietly read the golden horse, but one thing you must take heed. Put him on a common saddle of wood and leather, and not the golden one, which hangs close by, or else it will go ill with you." Then the fox stretched out his tail, and the king's son seated himself upon it, and away went stock and stone until hair whistled in the wind. Everything happened just as the fox had said. The prince came to a stable which the golden horse was standing, but just as he was going to put the common saddle upon him, he thought, "It will be a shame to put such a beautiful beast if I do not give him the good saddle, which belongs to him by right." But scarcely had the golden saddle touched the horse that he began to neigh loudly. The grooms awoke and seized the youth and threw him into prison. The next morning he was sentenced by the court to death, but the king promised to grant him life, and the golden horse as well, if he could bring back the beautiful princess from the golden castle. With a heavy heart, the youth set out, yet luckily for him, he soon found the trusty fox. "I ought to leave you to your ill luck," said the fox, "but I pity you, and will help you once more out of your trouble. This road takes you straight to the golden castle. You will reach it by evening tide, and at night, when everything is quiet, the beautiful princess goes to the bathing house to bathe. When she enters it, run up to her and give her a kiss. Then she will follow you, and you can take her away with you. Only do not allow her to take leave of her parents first, or else it will go ill with you." Then the fox stretched out his tail, and the king's son seated himself upon it, and away the fox went over stock and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. When he reached the golden castle, it was just as the fox said. He waited until midnight, when everything lay in deep sleep, and the beautiful princess was going to the bathing house. Then he sprang up and gave her a kiss. She said that she would like to go with him, but she asked him pitifully with tears to allow her first to take leave of her parents. At first he withstood her prayer, but when she wept more and more, and fell at his feet, he at last gave in. But no sooner had the maiden reached the bedside of her father than he and all the rest of the castle awoke, and the youth was laid hold and put into prison. The next morning the king said to him, "Your life is forfeited, and you can only find mercy if you take away the hill which stands in front of my windows. It prevents me seeing beyond it." What is this, Minecraft? I don't have a shovel. And you must finish it all within 8 days. And if you do... What is this? The fucking... What's that called again? The technique that Sanosuke Sagara learns in Rurouni Kenshin. Futai no Kiwami? Where was I? Your life is... Okay. You must finish 8 days. If you do that, you shall have my daughter's reward. The king's son began, dug the shovel without leaving off. But when, after 7 days, he saw the little he had done, all his work was good as nothing, he fell into great sorrow and gave up hope. But on the evening of the 7th day, the fox appeared and said, "You do not deserve that I should take any trouble about you. But just go away and lie down to sleep, and I will do the work for you." The next morning when he awoke, he looked out the window and saw the hill was gone. The youth ran, full of joy, to the king and told him the task was fulfilled. And whether he liked it or not, the king had to hold his word and give him his daughter. And so the two set forth together, and it was not long before the trusty fox came up to them. "You have certainly got what is best," said he, "but the golden horse also belongs to the maiden of the golden castle." "How shall I get it?" asked the youth. "That I will tell you. First, take the beautiful maiden to the king who sent you to the golden castle. There will be unheard of rejoicing. They will gladly give you the golden horse, and bring it out to you. Mount it as soon as possible, and offer your hand to all in for fair. Last of all to the beautiful maiden. And as soon as you have taken her hand, swing her up onto the horse, and gallop away, and no one will be able to bring you back, for the horse runs faster than the wind." And all was carried out successfully, and the king's son carried off the beautiful princess to the golden horse. The fox did not remain behind, and he said to the youth, "Now I will help you to get to the golden bird. When you come near the castle, when the golden bird is to be found, let the maiden down, and I will take her into my care. Then ride with the golden horse into the castle yard, and there will be great rejoicing at the sight, and they will bring out the golden bird for you. And as soon as they have you have the cage in your hand, gallop back to us, and take the maiden away again." When the plan had succeeded, the king's son was about to ride home with his treasures, and the fox said, "Now you shall reward me for my help." "What do you require for it?" asked the youth. "When you go into the wood yonder, shoot me dead, and chop off my head and feet." That would be fine gratitude. See, you can see sarcasm in text. It's like he says, "That would be fine gratitude." You instantly know he's being sarcastic. Said, "That would be fine gratitude," said the king's son. "I cannot possibly do that to her, you." The fox said, "If you will not do it, I must leave you. But before I go away, I will give you a piece of good advice. Be careful about two things. Buy no gallows flesh, and do not sit at the edge of any well." And then he ran into the wood. The youth thought, "That is a wonderful beast. He has strange whims. Who is going to buy gallows flesh? And the desire to sit by the edge of a well has never yet seized me." He rode on with the beautiful maiden. This kind of reminds me of Macbeth, from where there's always some sort of side meaning, like, "Oh, your castle will be fine," until an army of trees marches on, and then of course it's just people marching with fucking branches. It's like, fuck you, loop. It's like, oh, technicality. You mispronounced that. I don't fucking care. He rode on with the beautiful maiden, and his road took him again through the village in which his two brothers had remained. There was a great stir and noise, and when he asked what was going on, he was told that the two men were going to be hanged. As he came nearer to a place, he saw that they were his brothers, who had been playing all kinds of wicked pranks and had squandered all their wealth. He inquired whether they could not be set free. "Buy no gallows flesh." "If you will pay for them," answered the people. "But why should you waste your money on wicked men and buy them free?" He did not think twice about it, but paid for them. And when they were set free, they all went on their way together. They came to the wood where the fox had first met them, as it was cool and pleasant within. And the two brothers said, "Let us rest a while and eat and drink." He agreed, and whilst they were talking, he forgot himself and sat down upon the edge of a well. And without thinking of any evil, the two brothers threw him backward into the well, and took the maiden, the horse, and the bird, and went home to their father. "Here, we bring you not only the golden bird," said they, "but have won the golden horse also, and the maiden for the golden castle." We are dealing with an adult here. The maiden can talk. It's not like she's mute. She literally was protesting about saying, "Hey, I need to talk to the king and stuff who are..." And that's saying she was so... And he saved their lives. And they outright murdered him. Never mind the fact that it's their brother. Then there was great joy, but the horse would not eat, the bird would not sing, and the maiden sat and wept. But the youngest brother was not dead. By good fortune the well was dry, and he fell upon soft moss without being hurt. But he could not get out again. Even in his strait, the faithful fox did not leave him. It came and leapt down to him and upbraided him for having forgotten his advice. "But yet I cannot give it up. So," he said, "I will help you again into daylight." He bade him grasp his tail and keep tight hold of it, and then he pulled him up. "You are not out of danger yet," said the fox. "Your brothers are not sure of your death, and has surrounded the wood with watchers, who are to kill you if you let yourself be seen. But a poor man was sitting upon the road, with whom the youth changed clothes. Wait, he's going to get shot instead, though. And in his way, he got to the king's palace. No one knew him, but the bird began to sing. The horse began to eat, and the beautiful maiden left off weeping. The king was astonished, asked, "What does this mean?" Then the maiden said, "I do not know, but I have been sorrowful, and now I am so happy. I feel as if my true bridegroom has come." She told him all that had happened, and although the other brothers had threatened her with death if she were to betray anything, the king commanded all the people in the castle should be brought before him, and amongst them came the youth in his ragged clothes. But the maiden knew him at once and fell upon his neck, and the wicked brothers were seized and put to death. But he was married to the beautiful maiden, and declared heir to the king. But how did it fare with the poor fox? Long afterward, the king's son was once again walking in the wood, when the fox met him and said, "You have everything now that you can wish for, but there is never an end to my misery, and yet it is in your power to free me." And again he asked him, with tears, to shoot him dead and chop off his head and feet. And so he did it, and scarcely was it done, the fox changed into a man, and was no other than the brother of the beautiful princess, who at last was freed from the magic charm which had been laid upon him, and now nothing more was wanting to their happiness, as long as they lived. The Raven. There once upon a time was a queen, who had a little daughter who was still so young that she had to be carried. One day the child was naughty, and the mother might say that what she liked, but the child would not be quiet. Then she became impatient, and as the ravens were flying about the palace, she opened the window and said, "I wish you were a raven and would fly away. Then I should have some rest." Are you really getting this pissed off at a baby crying? Scarcely had she spoken the words before the child was changed into a raven and flew from her arms out the window, and it flew into the dark forest and stayed in a long time, and the parents heard nothing of their child. Then one day a man was on his way through the forest and heard the raven crying, and followed the voice. And when he came near, the bird said, "I am a king's daughter by birth, and am bewitched, but thou canst set me free." "What am I to do?" asked he. She said, "Go further into the forest, and thou wilt find a horse, wherein sits an aged woman, who will offer thee meat and drink, but you must accept nothing. For if thou eatest or drinkest anything, thou wilt fall into a sleep, and thou wilt not be able to deliver me. In the garden behind the house there is a great heap of tan, and on this thou shalt stand and wait for me. For 3 days I will come every afternoon at 2 o'clock in a carriage, and on the first day 4 white horses will be harnessed to it, then 4 chestnut horses, and lastly 4 black ones. But if thou art not awake, but sleeping, I shall not be free." The man promised to do everything that she desired, but the raven said, "Alas, I know already that thou wilt not deliver me. Thou wilt accept something from the woman." Then the man once more promised that he would certainly not touch anything either to eat or drink. But when he entered the house, the old woman came to him and said, "Poor man, how faint you are! Come and refresh yourself, eat and drink." "No," said the man, "I will not eat or drink." She however let him have no peace, and said, "If you will not eat, take 1 drink out of the glass. 1 is nothing." Then he let himself be persuaded, and drank. Then shortly before 2 o'clock in the afternoon he went to the garden, to the tan heap, to wait for the raven. As he was standing there, his weariness all at once became so great that he could not struggle against it, and lay down for a short time. But he was determined not to go to sleep. Hardly, however, had he laid down, than his eyes closed of their own accord, and he fell asleep and slept so soundly that nothing in the world could have aroused him. At 2 o'clock the raven came driving up with 4 white horses, but she was already in deep grief and said, "I know he is asleep." And when she came into the garden, he was indeed laying there asleep on the heap of tan. She alighted from the carriage, went to him and shook him, and called him, but he did not awake. The next day about noon the old woman came again, and brought him food and drink, but he would not take any of it. But she let him have no rest, and to persuade him until he took at least 1 drink out of the glass. Towards 2 o'clock he went to the garden of the tan heap to wait for the raven, but all at once he felt great weariness, that his limbs would no longer support him. He could not help himself, and was forced to lay down. And fell into a heavy sleep. When the raven drove up with 4 brown horses, she was already full of grief, and said, "I know he is asleep." She went to him, but there he lay sleeping, and there was no wakening him. The next day the old woman asked what was the meaning of this. He was neither eating nor drinking anything. But did he want to die? He replied, "I am not allowed to eat or drink, and will not do so, But she set a dish with food and a glass of wine before him, and when he smelt he could not resist, and swallowed a deep draught, and when the time came, he went into the garden to heap the tan, and waited for the king's daughter. But he became still more weary than on the day before, and lay down and slept so soundly as if he had been a stone. At 2 o'clock the raven came with 4 black horses and the coachman, and everything else was black. She was already in deepest grief, and said, I know that he is asleep and cannot deliver me. When she came to him, there he was laying fast asleep. She shook him and called him, but he could not be wakened. Then she laid a loaf beside him, and after that a piece of meat, and thirdly a bottle of wine, and he might consume as much all of them as he liked, but they would never grow less. After that she took a gold ring from her finger, and put it on his, and her name was graven on it. Lastly she laid a letter beside him wherein was written what she had given him, and that none of these things would ever grow rust. And it was also written, I see right well that thou wilt never be able to deliver me, but if thou art still willing to deliver me, come to the golden castle of Stromberg. In it lies thy power, of that I am certain. And when she had given him all these things, she seated herself in the carriage, and drove to the castle of Stromberg. When the man awoke and saw he had slept, he was sad at heart, and said, She is certainly driven by, and I have not set her free. Then he perceived the things which were lying beside him, and read the letter therein was written, how everything had happened. So he arose and went away, intending to go to the golden castle of Stromberg. But he did not know where it was. After he had walked about the world for a long time, he entered into a dark forest, and walked for 14 days, and still could not find his way out. Then it was once more evening, and he was so tired that he lay down in a thicket and fell asleep. Next day he went onwards, and in the evening, as he was again about to lie down beneath some bushes, he heard such a howling and crying that he could not go to sleep. And at that time, when people light the candles, he saw one glimmering, and arose and went toward it. And then he went and came to a house, which seemed very small, for in front of it a great giant was standing. He thought to himself, if I go in, the giant sees me, and it will very likely cost me my life. At length he ventured and went in, and when the giant saw him, he said, It is well thou comest, for it is long since I have eaten. I will at once eat thee for my supper. I'd rather you would leave that alone, said the man. I do not like to be eaten. But if thou hast any desire to eat, I have quite enough here to satisfy thee. If that be true, said the giant, thou mayest be easy. I was only going to devour thee because I had nothing else. Then they went and sat down at the table, and the man took out the bread, wine, and meat, which would never come to an end. This pleases me well, said the giant, and ate to his heart's content. Then the man said to him, Canst thou tell me where the golden castle of Stromberg is? The giant said, I will look at my map. All the towns and villages and houses are to be found on it. He brought out the map, which he had in his room, and looked for the castle, but it was not to be found on it. It's no matter, said he. I have still some larger maps in my cupboard upstairs, and we will look for them. But there, too, it was in vain. The man wanted to go onwards, but the giant begged him to wait a few days longer until his brother, who had gone out to bring some provisions, came home. When the brother came home, they inquired about the golden castle of Stromberg. He replied, When I have eaten and had enough, I will look at this map. Then he went with them up to the chamber, and they searched his map, but he could not find it. Then he brought out still older maps, and they never rested until they found the golden castle of Stromberg, but it was many thousand miles away. How am I to get there? Asked the man. The man said, I have 2 hours' time, during which I will carry you into the neighborhood, but after that I must be home to suckle the child that we have. So the giant carried the man to about 100 leagues from the castle, and said, Thou canst very well walk the rest of the way alone. Then he turned back, but the man went onwards day and night, until at length he came to the golden castle of Stromberg. It stood on a glass mountain, and the bewitched maiden drove in her carriage round the castle, and then went inside. He rejoiced when he saw her, and wanted to climb up to her, but when he began to do so, he also slipped down the glass again, and when he saw that he could not reach her, he was filled with trouble, and said to himself, I will stay down here and wait for her. And so he built for himself a hut, and stayed in it a whole year, and every day the king's daughter driving about, but never could go to her. Then one day he saw from his hut 3 robbers, who were beating each other, and cried to them, God be with ye. They stopped when they heard the cry, but as they saw no one, they once more began to beat each other, and that too most dangerously. So he cried again, God be with ye. Again they stopped and looked round, but as they saw no one, they went on beating each other. Then he cried for the 3rd time, God be with ye, and thought, I must see what these 3 are about. They went thither and asked why they were beating each other so furiously. One of them said that he found a stick, and then when he struck the door with it, the door would spring open. The next said that he found a mantle, and that whoever puts it on was invisible. But the 3rd said, he found a horse on which a man could ride everywhere, even up the glass mountain. And now they did not know whether they ought to have these things in common, or have them ought to be divided. Then the man said, I will give you something in exchange for each of these 3 things. Money indeed I have not, but I have other things of more value. But first I must try yours to see if you have told me the truth. They put him on the horse, and threw the mantle around him, and gave him the stick in hand. And when he had all these things, they were no longer able to see him. So he gave them some vigorous blows, and cried, Now, vagabonds, you have got what you deserved. Are you satisfied? And he rode up the glass mountain. But when he came in front of the castle at top, it was shut. And then he struck the door with his stick, and it sprang open immediately. He went into the ascended stairs, and he came to the hall where the maiden was sitting with a golden cup, full of wine before her. She, however, could not see him, because he had the mantle on. And when he came up to her, he drew his finger from the ring which she had given him, and threw it into the cup, so that it rang. Then she cried, That is my ring. So the man who is set to be free must be here. They must search the whole castle, and did not find him. But he had gone out, and seated himself on the horse, and thrown off the mantle. And when they had come to the door, they saw him, and cried aloud in their delight. Then he alighted, and took the king's daughter in his arms. But she kissed him, and said, Now thou hast set me free, and tomorrow we will celebrate our wedding. The King of the Golden Mountain. There was a certain merchant who had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were both young, and could not walk. And 2 richly laden ships of his sailed forth to the sea with all his property on board. And just as he was expecting to win much money by them, news came that they had gone to the bottom, and now instead of being a rich man, he was a poor one, and had nothing left but one field outside of town. In order to drive his misfortune a little out of his thoughts, he went out to his field, and as he was walking forwards and backwards in it, a little black mannikin stood suddenly by his side, and asked why he was so sad, and what he was taking so much to heart. Then said the merchant, If thou couldst help me, I would willingly tell thee. Who knows, replied the black dwarf. Perhaps I can help thee. Then the merchant told him that all he possessed was gone to the bottom of the sea, and that he had nothing left to buy but his field. Do not trouble thyself, said the dwarf. If thou wilt promise to give me the first thing that rubs itself against thy leg when thou art home, and to bring it here into place in 12 years' time, thou shalt have as much money as thou wilt. The merchant thought, What can that be but my dog? And did not remember his little boy. So he said yes, gave the black man a written and sealed promise, and went home. When he reached home, his little boy was so delighted that he held by a bench, tottered up to him, and seized him fast with a leg. The father was shocked, for he remembered his promise, and now knew what he had pledged himself to do. And as he still found no money in his chest, he thought the dwarf had only been jesting. But a month afterward, when he went up to the garret, intending to gather together some of the old tin to sell, he saw a great heap of money laying there. Then he was happy again, made purchases, became a greater merchant than ever before, and felt that this world was well governed. In the meantime, the boy grew tall, and at the same time sharp and clever. But the nearer the 12th year approached, the more anxious grew the merchant, so that his distress might be seen on his face. One day his son asked him what ailed him, but the father would not say. The boy, however, persisted so long that at last he told him that, without being aware of what he was doing, he had promised him to a black dwarf, and received much money for doing so. He said likewise that he had set his hand and seal to this, and that now that 12 years had gone by, he would have to give him up. Then said the son, "O father, do not be uneasy, all will go well. The black man has no power over me." The son himself been blessed by the priest, and when the time came, the father and son went together to the field. And the son made a circle and placed himself inside it with his father. Then came the black dwarf, and said to the old man, Hast thou brought with thee what thou hast promised me? He was silent, but the son asked, What dost thou want here? Then said the black dwarf, I have to speak with thy father, and not with thee. The son replied, Thou hast betrayed and misled my father. Give back the writing. No, said the black dwarf, I will not give up my rights. They spoke together for a long time after this, but at last they agreed that the son, as he did not belong to the enemy of mankind, nor yet to his father, should seat himself in a small boat, which should lie on the water which was flowing away from them, and that the father should push it off with his own foot. The boat capsized, so the keel was uppermost, and the father believed his son was lost, and went home and mourned for him. The boat, however, did not sink, but floated quietly away, and the boy sat safely inside. They floated thus for a long time, until at last it stopped by an unknown shore. Then he landed and saw a beautiful castle before him, and set out to go to it. But when he entered, he found that it was bewitched. He went through every room, but all were empty until he reached the last, where a snake lay coiled in a ring. The snake, however, was an enchanted maiden, who rejoiced to see him, and said, Hast thou come, my deliverer? I already waited 12 years for thee. This kingdom is bewitched, and thou must set it free. How can I do that? He inquired. Tonight come 12 black men, covered with chains, who ask what thou art doing here. Keep silent and give them no answer, and let them do what they will with thee. They will torment thee, beat thee, stab thee. Let everything pass, only do not speak. At 12 o'clock they must go away again. On the second night 12 others will come. On the third, 24, who will cut off thy head. But at 12 o'clock their power will be over, and if thou hast endured all, and hast not spoken the slightest word, I shall be released. I will come to thee, and I will, in a bottle, have some of the water of life, and I will rub thee with that, and then thou wilt come to life again, and be as healthy as before. And then, said he, I will gladly set thee free. And everything happened just as she had said. The black men could not force a single word from him. And on the third night the snake became a beautiful princess, who came with water of life, and brought him back to life again. So she threw herself into his arms and kissed him, and there was joy and gladness in the whole castle. After that their marriage was celebrated, and he was the king of the Golden Mountain. They lived very happily together, and the queen bore a fine boy. 8 years had gone by, and the king bethought him of his father. His heart was moved, and wished to visit him. The queen, however, would not let him go away, and said, I know beforehand that it will cause unhappiness. But he suffered her to have no rest until she consented. At their parting, she gave him a wishing ring, and said, Take this ring and put it on thy finger, and then thou wilt immediately be transported whithersoever thou wouldst be. Only thou must promise me not to use it in wishing me away from this place and with my father. That he promised her, put the ring on his finger, and wished himself home, just outside the town where his father lived. Instantly he found himself there, and made for the town. But when he came to the gate, the sentries would not let him in, because he wore such strange and yet such rich and magnificent clothing. Then he went to the hill where a shepherd was watching his sheep, changed clothes to him, put on his old shepherd's coat, and then entered the town without hindrance. When he came to his father, he made himself known, but he did not at all believe that the shepherd was his son, and said he certainly had had a son, but that he was dead long ago. However, as he saw he was a poor, needy shepherd, he would give him something to eat. Then the shepherd said to his parents, I am verily your son. Do you know of no mark on my body by which you could recognize me? Yes, said his mother, our son has a raspberry mark under his right arm. He slipped back his shirt and saw the raspberry under his right arm, and no longer doubted he was their son. He was then told that he was the king of the Golden Mountain, and his king's daughter was his wife, and that they had a fine son of 7 years old. Then said the father, That is certainly not true. It is a fine kind of king who goes about in a ragged shepherd's cloak. On this the son fell into a passion, and without thinking of his promise, turned his ring around, and wished for both his wife and child with him. They were there in a second, but the queen wept and reproached him, and said that he had broken his word, and had brought misfortune upon her. He said, I have done it thoughtlessly, and now not with evil intention, and tried to calm her, and she pretended to believe this, but she had mischief in her mind. Then he led her out of the town into the field and showed her the stream, whether the little boat had been pushed off. And then he said, I am tired. Sit down. I will sleep while in my lap. And he laid his head on her lap and fell asleep. When he was asleep, she first drew the ring from his finger, then she drew away the foot from which under him, leaving only the slipper behind. And she took her child in her arms and wished herself back into her own kingdom. When he awoke, there he lay quite deserted, and his wife and child were gone, and so was the ring from his finger. The slipper was only still there a token. Home to thy parents thou canst not return, thought he. They would say thou wast a wizard. Thou must be off, and walk off on until thou arrive in thy own kingdom. So he went away, and came at length to a hill, at which 3 giants were standing, disputing with each other, because they did not know how to divide their father's property. When they saw him passing by, they called to him and said, Little men had quick wits, and that he was to divide their inheritance for them. The inheritance, however, consisted of a sword, which had this property: if anyone took it in his hands and said, All heads off but mine, every head would lie on the ground. Secondly, a cloak, which made anyone who put it on invisible. They're just giving these cloaks out like candy. Thirdly, a pair of boots, which could transport the wearer to any place he wished in a moment. He said, Give me the 3 things, and I will see if there is still a good condition. They gave him the cloak, and when he put on, he was invisible, and changed into a fly. Then he resumed his own form and said, The cloak is a good one, now give me the sword. They said, No, we will not give thee that. If thou were to say, All heads off but mine, all our heads would be off, and thou alone would be left with thine. Nevertheless, they gave it to him, with the condition he was only to try it against the tree. This he did, and the sword cut the trunk in 2, as if the tree was to be a blade of straw. Then he wanted to have the boots likewise, but they said, No, we will not give them. Thou hadst them on their feet, and wished thyself at the top of the hill. We should be left down here with nothing. Oh no, said he, I will not do that. So they gave him the boots as well. And now when he had got all these things, he thought of nothing but his wife and child, and said to himself, Oh, if I were but on the golden mountain. And at the same moment he vanished from sight of the giants, and thus their inheritance was divided. When he was near the palace, he heard the sounds of joy, and fiddles and flutes, and people told him that his wife was celebrating her wedding with another. Then he fell into a rage and said, False woman, she betrayed and deserted me whilst I slept. So he put on his cloak, and unseen by all went into the palace. When he entered the dining hall, a great table was spread with delicious food, and the guests were eating and drinking and laughing and jesting. She sat on a royal seat in the midst of them splendid apparel, with a crown on her head. He placed himself behind her, so that no one saw. And when she put a piece of meat on the plate for herself, he took it away and ate it. And when she poured a glass of wine for herself, he took it away and drank it. She was always helping herself to something, and yet she never got anything. The plate and glass disappeared immediately. And then, dismayed and ashamed, she arose and went to the chamber, and wept. But he followed her there. She said, Has the devil power over me, or did my deliverer never come? Then he struck her in the face and said, Did thy deliverer never come? It is he who has thee in his power, thou traitor. Have I deserved this from thee? Then he made himself visible and went into the hall, and cried, The wedding is at an end, the true king has returned. The kings, princes, and counselors who were assembled ridiculed and mocked him. But he did not trouble to answer them, and said, Will you go away or not? On this they tried to seize him, and pressed upon him. But he drew the sword and said, All heads off but mine. And all the heads rolled on the ground, and he alone was master, and once more king of the Golden Mountain. I feel like they're toward the very end of that last couple paragraphs, there are several things that are... But anyway, that last story had quite a few odd things. Bye.